welcome to my channel. This channel focuses on educational research, teaching and learning in general. This video today is going to be focused more on teaching. I have to prepare some lectures for my teaching at Durham University, so I thought I will create a video to show how I approach my teaching. I hope that this video will be actually helpful for people who are going to teach the same or similar modules in other universities, for people who might be teaching assistants and they don't know where to start, or for people who are doing any type of teaching and they would like to pick up some ideas about teaching approaches. And I'm going to create this video in a way that I will show you how I prepare for these lectures day after day, not exactly preparing every day, but every time I prepare, I'm going to explain to you my thinking process. So I'm going to show you exactly all my preparation to the lectures, and hopefully, if this video is not too long, I will also include some reflection on my teaching. So when I start preparing for a lecture or any presentation, the first thing I do is to think of my audience. And for this specific occasion, I have to teach undergraduate students who are attending a BA in primary education course. And on the one hand, I find this quite easy because I had the same BA, not at Durham, but at the University of Thessaly some years ago. So I know how people at this course approach a research methods module. Thinking about my audience, the first thing I thought was, I have first to persuade these people that this is important. They are not people who chose to come to a conference. They are not people who are interested already in the topic. Maybe they are not. I'm not teaching a module that it is a core module for researchers. It is a module that some people might actually feel it is not relevant to what they want to learn. At the beginning of the first lecture, I thought that I would ask the students to tell me why it is important. So, in other words, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the cognitive activation. I'm going to make the students initially thinking about the topic of my lectures. And at the same time, I'm going to ask them to think why this is important. I'm not going to tell them why this is important. Then the second thing I will do, and I have started already doing, is I gather the feedback that I had from the previous modules. So I have already taught in 3 modules in higher education the previous years. So I always start with taking the feedback from the previous modules and starting reflecting on how I will do my teaching better this year. So one of the comments I had, for example, last year was one of my students who didn't have English as a native language suggested that I should put more examples on my slides. I think maybe because of language difficulties, he didn't have the time to keep writing all the notes, or maybe she just found it more useful to have more examples on the slides. So even though my usual approach with slides is to put some keywords that help me obviously remember what I have to say and also point out towards the most important concepts, I think this year I'm going to include more examples and maybe a little bit more text on my slides, just because I think this is quite an important feedback I received last year. The third thing I'm considering is that I want to prepare evidence-based slides and adopt research-informed approaches. So I should take into consideration theories and journal articles that show how we can teach adults and how we can teach in general, so with different teaching approaches. I found this bit very interesting because, as I said, I did a BA in primary education myself. So all these years, I have started adopting a child-centered approach, a student-centered approach. Whilst we're trying to put the student at the center, we still give lectures at the universities. So at the lecture, usually it's a teacher-centered approach. You just have someone, a lecturer, just giving a lecture, and the student is not considered as much as in seminars or tutorials, etc. And the challenge is going to be that I want to do this session interactive even though it's a lecture. So for this reason, I'm going to use Padlet. So I'm projecting a Padlet wall in my classroom, and I'm going to ask the students through their phones or laptops or tablets to put their sticky notes up, so I can get some ideas about what they've already know about some of the concepts I'm going to teach, because I don't want to keep explaining things that they know, or don't explain sufficiently things that they have no idea about, assuming that they know them. So I'm going to use Padlet and try to find other ways to make these sessions interactive as much as possible, even though there are lectures, because I think the students should be at the center. So these are my initial thoughts about the lectures. Consider the audience, take into account the feedback that I have about my previous teaching, always pursue evidence-based courses and research-informed teaching practice, and of course, try to make it coherent and to have logical sense for my audience based on what they've already known.
Today, I am going to think about the aims of my lecture. The first thing I do when I have to teach a module, if I'm not the person who wrote the handbook, is to read the handbook. Exactly after finishing the activity that I ask the students to tell me why this topic is important for them. In the next slide, I'll give them the module learning outcomes. Some students may not read the module handbook, so hopefully this will help them know the learning outcomes. Because the learning outcomes are quite generic, I'm always writing the learning outcomes that I feel that are linked to these specific lectures. I use Bloom's taxonomy to write learning outcomes, but it doesn't mean necessarily that someone has to use Bloom's taxonomy. There are other types of taxonomies as well, such as solo taxonomy, that may work better for you, that you are designing your own teaching. The reason why I decided to use Bloom's taxonomy is because I find it quite useful for the content I am particularly teaching. So some people say that the revised version of Bloom's taxonomy is better than the first taxonomy. Some people say that the Bloom's taxonomy shouldn't appear like this. For example, Dylan William created a different shape to show Bloom's taxonomy, posted lately on Twitter as well. So I'm not going to go into that discussion, but say that obviously I will have some targets that are related to the content of the specific module. However, I will also set some targets that they are more related to synthesis and analysis and evaluation. First, I am going to present them their learning outcomes as presented in the module handbook. And then in the next slide, I'm going to give them some more specific learning outcomes and targets based on Bloom's taxonomy, including some recalling statements and some more complex high-order thinking skills that they will have to demonstrate using the knowledge that they have just learned. However, I have to admit that students will be able to demonstrate high-order thinking skills during the seminars that will follow. So we will have first the 2 lectures, and then we will have 3 seminars following these lectures. So the targets I'm writing down are going to match the activities that we are going to have during lectures and obviously during the seminars. Today I decided to work in a coffee shop, so I'm on my way to Sades. Just finished reading and adding content on my slides. Saturday, 23rd of November, and I've spent most of the day trying to design my activities. Before I do that, actually I did some reading of journal articles that are related to effective teaching methods for higher education. So what I'm going to include as techniques for these lectures and the following seminar is retrieval practice. Another thing I'm going to try to do is obviously social interaction between my students, because I support Vygotsky's approach that people learn better when they interact with each other, so social constructivism, etc. What I was really confused today, and I was trying to figure it out by reading different articles, is actually whether I should use some flipped classroom approach or not in my teaching. So flipped classroom approach, you may be already familiar with it, is the one that makes the transmission of knowledge take place prior to the lecture or seminar, etc. And then the actual seminar and the actual lecture is the one that focuses more on activities that they would normally take place after the lecture. So I was a bit confused because I was looking on different research papers trying to see whether that's actually effective or not to do it. So in one of the papers I found, which was published in 2015, called The Use of Flipped Classrooms in Higher Education, a scoping review, they did a scoping review and they actually said that there is not strong enough evidence to support that student outcomes are better in flipped classroom. So I thought, is it really worth doing? And however, then I saw another meta-analysis published in 2018, which is called Effects of the Flipped Classroom Instructional Strategy on Students' Learning Outcomes, a meta-analysis, and that it is in favor of a flipped classroom instructional strategy, even though, to be honest, with social sciences, they didn't have that many studies in their meta-analysis. But I also found some other articles, such as Exploring Students' Competence, Autonomy and Relatedness in the Flipped Classroom Pedagogical Model. So at the end, by looking at different evidence, I decided I'm going to use a flipped classroom approach, because there is some evidence out there showing that the learning outcomes are improved, but also there's other evidence about student autonomy, etc. So I thought it's worth doing. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to ask the students after the first lecture and prior to the second lecture to do some reading, because I haven't prepared video recordings of the lectures. It's the first time I'm teaching this module, so really I don't really have time to do that, but I will ask them to do some core reading before the second lecture and the seminars, and I'm going to tell them that this is highly recommended, because in that way they're going to get the most of the seminars. I'll try to engage the students in activities that they are more active and social, and they're going to help them demonstrate their higher order thinking skills. So they will have to have done the pre-reading and this pre-class basically activity in order for them to benefit from what we are going to do. So if the students this year tell me that they really like the flipped class setting and they found it useful, I think what I will do next year is probably I'm going to record a 10-minute video in which I will transmit the necessary knowledge in a teacher-centered approach, that this will be a pre-class activity for them to watch the video and then have the actual activities during the sessions. Last but not least, I'm going to ask the students to complete a self-assessment at the end of the last session. So I'm going to ask them to go back to the learning outcomes I gave them at the beginning of the first lecture and see and evaluate whether they feel they've achieved these. It's 9:30 at night, the night before my lecture. I had a very busy day at the School of Education today, and I am just in my living room, and I should really prepare for the lecture tomorrow. Before every lecture, before every presentation, I do rehearse it, and at the same time I record it. The reason why I'm doing this is because I feel that when I record something, I can obviously play it back. I see lectures and presentations a little bit like theater, so I want to make sure I give a good performance. I always rehearse my lectures and my presentations by standing up because I want to rehearse both verbally and non-verbally. So I want to give the full performance the night before. I want to make sure that my pace is correct. I have a diverse group of learners in the classroom, so I want to make sure that the speed I'm talking is appropriate for them. So when I hear the recording, I am able to see whether something is not explained clearly, and I'm trying to improve the explanations. I also time the lecture to make sure that I'm at the right timing, I don't overrun. It's better to have some time for questions and obviously time for thinking for the students. Probably this video is too long to include any reflection time, but please subscribe to this channel and I hope to see you soon.